Today I want to go through showing you the additional modulation that the rhythm's got. It's often thought, and kind of correct, that there's only one LFO per track, and then you have the FX LFO. But you can actually modulate more than that on the rhythm using the control in. You kind of set up basically this different settings using, and I'll show you this in more detail in a minute, using the control inputs and particular settings that allow you to map the audio to modulation. And you can modulate in a variety of different ways and on a variety of different sounds, and also modulate the sound that's modulating, which is quite neat. So I want to kind of take you through the setup as well, because I'm often getting asked in comments, like, how does this work? And I'm kind of replying in text. So I figured I'd just make a video about it. And a bit of a tutorial, I guess, but also I just want to I've not really done a pure exploration of this modulation in its pure form. It's always been added on to another sketch. So I thought it was going to be useful for me to kind of go through it. The basic setup is, if I lift up the rhythm, you can see the blue cable here is just taking an audio out from the individual out of the bass drum, and it's going into the control input 1. The reason we do that is to basically, that's going to take the audio and then map it to whatever we want to modulate. So this is totally safe to do. It's just kind of audio mapped to control data. So there's no kind of feedback or nothing going. Once we've done that, we can modulate the bass drum with the bass drum, which is quite neat, or we can modulate a snare drum with the bass drum or any other setting, and even the effects, which is quite cool. So the way you do that, we got a basic standard kit here, which is always really quiet. So I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Let's get some volume on here. Let's just put a bit of compression on it, just so I can hear what I'm doing. It's a bit better. Yeah, compression learn. So when you hit the kick drum, you can see this little meter's running around. So the kind of the easiest way to do this, I find, is just putting in a pattern first, and then running expression learn. And what expression learn is going to do is this is actually setting for an expression pedal. For those of you who might play keyboards, or you often see these pedals that you push them down and lift them up, and they do different settings. You can control volume and that kind of stuff. So this is kind of what this is typically used for. But you can use it for any sort of signal. So we'll put some basic patterns. I've got 8 steps here, so I'll just put like there you go, basic kick drum. We go back to expression learn. We can kind of see this is bouncing around. We hit yes, and this is now going to map that audio and move it around quicker, or further, I should say. So expression learn, to find that, is settings, control input 1, because that's the one we're using. We could also use control input 2 if we had an additional cable. And then it might be set to CV originally. I'll toggle across and then hit let yes, and then you've got expression learn running. This reverse direction just flips the up and down for down and up, which we'll get to in a minute. And once you've done that, if you go to, the shortcut is just function kit, and then you'll go into your kit menu, and depending on where this might be set on the save or wherever you are previously, but then go down to control input 1, and then it's the modulation. You can see this modulating up and down. So you could then modulate any one of these settings for the kick drums. You can the LFOs, the bass drums, the sample. A lot of this stuff you would be familiar with within the normal LFOs. The thing that isn't immediately obvious is you can also modulate other sounds. You need to push down on these encoders, and if they're like mine, they want to turn as well. So you push down on those encoders, and then you can scroll through. Here is in a design floor, and then you can set your thing here, and then the amount, and then it goes into negative as well. So that was how you set that up. So you could modulate the bass drum. So let's do that, right? So we'll go to a filter, because this is the easiest one to hear. We'll turn the frequency up. You won't hear anything because it's every time the audio is going up, it's pushing the filter up. If we turn it down, it's going to start to cut it out. So the reason this sounds crunchy is because every time this is affecting the filter, this is going to change its slight volume, and it's going to do it every single micro step, every single like fraction of 1/127. So you get this clickiness, which is quite interesting when you start balancing it. So extreme settings can break the audio quite a lot, whereas subtle settings can be a bit more subtle. You kind of add almost like waveform kind of textures to it. So if you put it up into the plus and you come back out, turn your filter down, every time the kick drum hits, you're dropping it. If it was some resonance on it, you can kind of hear the effect a bit more. And obviously then you could go through each drum sound, right? And find one that sounds interesting. Just go to plastic, kind of sounds cool. So here we've just got a kick drum modulating the filter. So let's put something else in. That resonance we kind of liked, we'll put that in as well. Let's have a look. Resonance. We'll take down our own resonance so it's not resonating anymore. And then we'll add it every time the kick drum hits. So obviously you can go to a minus. If you put resonance on, you can take it away. So if we put the resonance on, hold your ears. So now we've got resonance on the kick, and we're basically taking them away every time the kick drum hits. So you can kind of hear it can be quite radical, and you kind of have to play around a bit. But you know, we've just got a kick drum going. The other cool thing you can do is map that modulation to a different sound, right? So if we put in a snare drum, let's just put one on every step, or almost every other step, and then we just push down once, and then we change our filter to a snare. So you might not want the kick drum playing, but you might want to still have the modulation. So you can go to your audio routing, turn off kick drum to main, so it's because it's still coming out of the individual outputs, you're still going to get the modulation, which can be quite useful if you want to focus in on what you're modulating and what is modulating without always hearing both of them. So to explain that, you could go to the kick drum here, start moving the kick drums around, and you get some interesting patterns, right? And remember, this bass drum its audio is what's modulating the other sounds. So you can influence the bass drum sound to influence the volume of it. So if I turn up the resonance for the bass drum, which we're not listening to, as you can hear, there's no bass drum. So the resonance is causing audio changes in the snare drum. So we're kind of making almost like ring modulations or that kind of idea, but based on audio. The other thing to bear in mind is every time you change the sound that's modulating, or the sound that is modulating, not the modulation source, not the modulation destination. So that in this case, the source is the bass drum. Every time you change the sound of the bass drum, you're changing the volume output. So this is where using expression learn to relearn the new kind of extremities. So now the volume might be beyond the original settings that we set. So we can relearn if we want to. We don't have to, we can keep it as it is, but if we relearn, we change the quality of it. You can also learn incrementally, so you could learn quickly, so you're only learning a section. You can reverse it. So you can get, like already you got some interesting patterns going here. pretty cool, right? Kind of like this. I mean, you know, and we're using like really basic stock snare sounds. So again, we could go through different sounds on the snare drum, right, to try and find something, or even use a different kick drum. The one I found that was quite interesting was the VCO, because you have some tunings and stuff on it. So it is the VCO that we're using on the snare drum track. So for example, we could turn this to, you know, like a D tune or something. What else have we got? Oops. You're going to find this as well. You're toggling through and you're always going to miss the one you want to use. Let's go to, so obviously if the settings don't carry over, you might have to change them. Let's have a look. So we'll try the bend. So you're going to get loads of this weirdness happen a lot. So I think it's good to kind of try to focus in on a few parameters and dial in, but you're going to get into some crazy spots regardless of what you do. I find as well, like having the separate sections, like track 1 and track 2, to control where sounds are triggered and like what's modulating and when it's modulating. You can kind of add little sections by removing the modulation source. Get things a bit tighter. So again, because it's modulating based on the volume, you can turn up the modulation source with the overdrive. Save doing your expression learn each time. Almost like a Hoovery kind of deal. God damn it, this encoder. There we go. I find holding it down in one spot so you don't keep moving it around, just holding it with your finger and tapping it seems to help a bit better. Turning something up and then scrolling through is quite useful. Believe it or not, the levels sometimes is quite good. What else have we got? The other thing you'll hear is it's not always the same. So unlike the traditional LFOs, you're always going to have this like perfect mapping. But because it's volume and because the sounds are always changing, And I kind of think it's probably not accurately capturing it every time. You're always going to get these subtle changes, and on certain settings that's going to be more obvious, like tune is a real sensitive one. Yeah, and if you get into like those details of like filters, especially with the resonance, you're going to pick up those kind of variations. Someone in the comments, actually, I was going to look up their username, but I completely forgot to. But they mentioned it sounds more reactive. I think you're totally right. It's more a reactive modulation than your kind of fixed modulation. That's a really good word for it. So we just got some interesting stuff there, and we're not using effects or nothing. We're not doing anything fancy. We're not kind of dialing in sounds. We're just playing around with that modulation. So it really kind of opens up the possibilities. I think reverb often can be a good effect that just kind of shows us what we're hearing a bit clearer sometimes, because you've got that additional spread of frequencies that you won't necessarily pick up on dry sounds. So I quite often use like a pre-delay just to kind of give me a sense of structure and sound. So we'll see what that does. Inadvertently made Forklift by Joe Beltram. So obviously, we're not using trigs for particular parameter settings. So if you wanted to kind of influence the volume and get into that, you could do that. I think I want to, add additional resonance to a step, and kind of really influence that volume, or even use your levels, right? So obviously as well, performance, right? Because you've got, you know, all these parameters setting on here on one screen. You can kind of get some pretty good expression stuff going on. It's a little bit cumbersome getting in and out of menus. You get used to the shortcuts, obviously, but you know, once you've picked your expression, or what's this particular control input 1, you can easily get into it just by pressing the settings. It remembers that. If you want to get back out and get back into control input 2, if you've got a cable set up, then you know you kind of have to toggle, but it's not too bad. No more menu diving than anything else, I suppose. You've also got modulation setup too. Like I mentioned, you've got all these settings as well, so you can modulate quite a lot of stuff. So this is effectively two sources that can be modulators, and a total of 8 destinations, which is pretty crazy. And obviously it can modulate itself, like as we showed at the start, a bass drum modulating a bass drum, and it's, you know, it's constantly cancelling and doing some crazy stuff. So yeah, it's pretty versatile. You've not got the fixed nature of an LFO, but then you've kind of got that option already built in. So I kind of quite like this. It really changes the sound of the rhythm quite dramatically. Easy to get a small cable just to plug in. Yeah, I'd recommend trying it out. I think I'm going to leave it here. It's pretty quick setup. If you have any questions, if I've missed anything out, I don't think I have, but just whack it in the comments and I'll try and get to it. But yeah, just hook it up and have a play around and see what you come up with. It's yeah, it's pretty cool.